I used to believe that life was a series of certainties, that if I tried hard, if I did the right thing, if I followed what society taught me, then I would find peace. I believed happiness lived in stability, in a good job, a solid relationship, a recognized title. And I followed that path for many years, working hard, doing my best, being kind. I did everything right by conventional standards, and I thought I was living the right way. But then one day, I started to feel that something wasn't right. Everything still looked fine on the surface. I still had a job, still had someone by my side, still had things to do. But deep down, I felt empty. The things that used to bring me joy no longer meant anything. The relationships that once felt close now sounded like repeated conversations. I didn't know why I felt so tired. I only knew that I was wearing a mask that had become too heavy. I began to ask myself, is this really the life I chose, or just the life I learned to accept? That question started as a tiny crack, and over time, it opened into a wider gap in my awareness. And then in a moment that wasn't dramatic, but was deeply breathtaking, I saw the truth, not the kind of truth you understand with the mind, but a truth you feel with your whole being, that I had been living inside a shell. That I had traded my inner truth just to please the world outside. That I had never truly listened to myself. Seeing the truth is not a gentle experience. It feels like an inner earthquake collapsing every structure I once leaned on. I no longer knew who I was. I no longer knew what was right. But in that exact moment, for the first time, I felt something real, unclear, but alive and deeply present. And from that moment on, everything began to change. Not in the way I hoped, not in a smooth, comforting sequence, but as a journey, one filled with challenge, with breaking with doubt. And yet a journey that slowly, step by step, led me back home to myself. When I saw the truth, the very first thing that happened was overwhelming confusion. Sounds ironic, doesn't it? People often talk about truth like it's light. But for me, that first light was blinding. It didn't illuminate the way forward. It only exposed the broken pieces I had buried. The cracks in relationships I once believed were solid. The compromises I had denied, making all in the name of stability. The times I stayed silent when my heart wanted to speak. And the emotions I had never named: sorrow, anger, disappointment with myself. I felt like all my protective layers were stripped away. No roles to hide behind. No justifications left to escape into. I stood there bare with myself, and that raw truth was anything but comfortable. Truth, I realized, isn't a specific answer. It's a mirror. And that mirror doesn't just reflect the beautiful parts of me, it lays bare the pieces I had rejected. I began to see how I had acted out of fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of judgment, fear of being unloved. I had used being good to cover up insecurity. I had used busyness to avoid loneliness. And once the truth emerged, I couldn't pretend anymore. At first, I resisted. I tried to go back to the old normal, even though deep down, I knew it had collapsed. I forced myself into my familiar routines, into the roles that once made me feel safe. But the more I tried, the more out of place I felt. What once fit now felt forced. Like putting on an old outfit that no longer fits, but wearing it anyway, because I wasn't used to being exposed. I remember nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling with tears falling for reasons I didn't fully understand. Not because I was in pain the way we usually think of pain, but because I was falling. Falling away from the anchors I had believed were permanent. falling into a space without a name, a space between what was and what's not yet, and no one could save me except myself. Seeing the truth made me question everything. I no longer easily believed what others said was good or right or proper. I started challenging the values I had lived by. Did I choose this job because I truly loved it, or because it gave me a sense of worth? Did I maintain these relationships because they nourished me, or because I feared being alone? Was I truly living, or just playing a role for so long that I forgot it was a role? The truth hurt, but at the same time, it began to open up a new space. A space where I could be honest with myself. A space where I could say I don't know. I'm scared. I feel lost, without feeling weak. And that was the first step. Seeing the truth didn't give me the answers, but it took away the pretending. It forced me to stop, to face myself, to slow my breath. And in that slowness, something very small began to take root. Not clear, not loud, but I could feel it. This was the first time I truly stepped into my life barefoot, with a heart just beginning to learn how to listen again. After the truth began to reveal itself, my life didn't suddenly become clearer or more comfortable. On the contrary, it became terrifyingly vague. I entered a stage that many call the void, that space between letting go of the old and not yet having built the new. It was as if I were walking across a bridge whose ends were both hidden in the fog. I had no idea where I was headed. I only knew I couldn't go back. And that made me feel unanchored, drifting. I used to think that once I saw the truth, everything would become clear. But no. Truth doesn't bring clarity right away. It strips away the illusions, but leaves behind an empty space. A vast emptiness I didn't know how to fill. I no longer believed in the old definitions of success, of worth, of happiness, but I hadn't yet discovered new ones. Each day felt like a rough draft, and I wasn't even sure what I was writing. During this time, I also began to lose the ability to pretend. I didn't know how to perform anymore. Casual conversations felt shallow. Relationships that no longer resonated began to fall apart. I found myself withdrawing not out of resentment, but because I simply didn't have the energy to maintain things that no longer felt true. I needed space to breathe, to slow down, to listen to the sounds within me, the ones that used to be drowned out by the noise of a busy life. Some people said I had changed, that I seemed quieter, more serious, not as cheerful as before. They weren't wrong, but they didn't understand. I wasn't cheerful in the old way anymore, the kind of cheerfulness built on pleasing others and forgetting myself. Now, I was learning to find a different kind of joy, the joy of being real. And on this journey, I realized something important. Truth isn't just in what I can clearly see on the outside. It also lives deep within the emotions I used to avoid. There were days I woke up feeling empty, with no desire to do anything. In the past, I would have blamed myself, forced myself to be positive to rise above it. But now, I let myself feel that way. I learned to stay with those uncomfortable emotions instead of pushing them away. I began to see them as part of me, not perfect, but honest. Emotions, I realized, are part of the truth. And if I want to truly see the truth, I must be brave enough to feel it all, even the fatigue, the disconnection, even the pain. I also started noticing little signs. A random article I stumbled across that touched something deep inside me. A piece of music that made me cry because it captured a wordless feeling I'd been carrying. a moment watching the sunset with no need to do anything, just to be there. These tiny things became my compass. Not a clear path, but a feeling that I was being true to myself. It turns out, truth doesn't come to take me to a specific destination. It comes to dismantle, to help me see everything I once built and choose again. I don't need to rush into creating a new version of myself. I just need to clear the space, make room for what truly belongs to me to show up. And little by little, I've learned to live without needing immediate answers. I no longer ask, when will everything be okay? Instead, I ask, what is true for me right now? And I let the answer come in the silence, in the small acts, in the moments when I stop running from myself. After spending some time living with the truth, not resisting it, not sugarcoating it, I began to realize something I had never understood. Before seeing the truth isn't just about opening your eyes. It's about opening your heart, because some truths don't come from the outside. They're not found in books, not delivered through a lecture or a deep conversation. They rise from within me, from those sudden heartaches, for no apparent reason, from the tightness in my chest. When I hear an offhand comment from those moments, I burst into tears without knowing why. These truths don't speak in words. They only whisper in moments when I'm still enough to hear them. And that's when I began facing the hard-to-accept truths. Like how I had spent many years trying to please others. Like how I'd forced myself to be strong just to hide my wounds. Like how I'd traded parts of myself just to hold on to a relationship I thought was love. Looking back on all that, I didn't blame myself anymore. I just felt a deep tenderness, as if I finally had the courage to embrace the child within me, the one who had tried so hard just to feel seen. I realized that most of the pain didn't come from the truth itself, but from how long I had denied it. I had wrapped myself in too many layers, the layer of forced positivity, the layer of success based on someone else's standards, the layer of everything's fine, even when I was falling apart inside. Those layers helped me survive. But once I began to see the truth, I knew it was time to peel them away. Taking off those layers wasn't easy, because underneath them was emptiness, a feeling like I no longer knew who I was. But I accepted that. I let the emptiness stay. I didn't rush to fill it with work or relationships or a new goal. I simply sat with it, quietly, gently, as if I were befriending a part of me that had been forgotten for too long. And from there, something miraculous began to happen. Not something grand or dramatic, just a softening. I began to feel my heart ease. I no longer reacted so sharply to criticism. I no longer felt the need to win every argument. I no longer felt threatened by silence or uncertainty, because I knew deep inside that I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I lived lighter, not because I had fewer problems, but because I no longer saw each problem as a failure. I started embracing even the tired days as part of real life. I learned to say no without guilt. I learned to say, I don't know, without feeling small. I learned to apologize, and I learned to forgive, not others, but myself. The truth didn't turn me into some enlightened being in a glamorous way. It simply helped me return to being a human and honest one. And that, for me, was freedom. Looking back, I see clearly now the truth never hurt me. It was my refusal to face the truth that caused the pain. And when I finally dared to look, to admit, to let my heart open, whether to tremble, to break, or to be still, that's when I truly began to live. not to meet expectations, but to connect to myself, to the world, to each moment passing by. When I finally had the courage to live with the truth, not painting it prettier than it is, and not running away from it, I began to notice another kind of shift, unfolding a shift in my relationships. And to be honest, this was one of the most difficult and painful parts of the journey back to myself. I started to realize that some of the relationships around me no longer reflected who I truly was. The conversations that used to excite me now felt empty. The connections that once seemed close now felt polite and surface level. Not because anyone was wrong or worse, but simply because I had changed. And they were still speaking a language. I used to speak the language I once used to survive, to be loved, to avoid being left behind. At first, I tried to hold on. I tried to act like before. Tried not to make anyone uncomfortable. Tried not to disturb the relationships that had been around for so long. But the more I tried, the more exhausted I felt. Every time I walked into a gathering I no longer wanted to be part of, I felt like I was betraying myself. Every time I laughed at something that no longer brought me joy, I felt a part of me fading. Then I started to let go, not out of anger, but out of acceptance. I didn't blame them for no longer understanding me. I didn't force them to walk this path with me. I simply stepped back quietly to make room for connections that felt more real, more meaningful, and lighter on my soul. And of course, that meant I had to pass through many moments of loneliness. There were nights when I sat alone, staring at my contact list, unsure of who to call. There were birthdays with fewer well wishes. There were messages I sent that never got a reply. But I also began to notice that in the stillness, I could hear my own voice more clearly. I no longer needed to say something just to sound good. I could be silent and still feel fully alive. And then from that quiet, new connections began to grow from places I never expected. Some people came gently through an honest story shared. Some were simply there with me in silence, not needing to say much, not trying to fix anything. They weren't loud. They didn't demand anything, but they showed up with a wordless kind of understanding. I realized that when I lived truthfully, I begin to attract people who are also truthful. Not perfect people, but people brave enough to be honest with themselves. People who don't shy away from uncomfortable emotions, who don't run from sadness, who don't judge vulnerability. They are people around whom I don't have to be anyone, and with them, I feel seen, accepted, heard without being corrected. I used to think awakening was a solitary journey, but now I understand. Once you dare to live honestly, you will find your tribe. Maybe not many, maybe not right away, but they will come, and they will stay because you're no longer playing a role to keep them. Now more than ever, I treasure the real relationships in my life, even if there are only one or two. I understand that not every presence is a connection, and not every moment of loneliness is a loss. Sometimes it's just the natural clearing of the soul, an essential part of what happens when you see the truth and choose to live in it. After all the layers I had peeled away, all the pain I had faced, and all the relationships I had let go of, the final thing I came to realize was this: I no longer needed to become anyone. I didn't have to try to be loved. I didn't have to perform the role of a better version. I just needed to be me, even if I wasn't sure yet who that was. And the moment I truly felt that was when I began to feel free. Not the loud kind of freedom, not the jumping for joy kind, but a quiet kind of relief. Like I was no longer carrying around an invisible backpack full of other people's expectations. Like I was finally breathing my own breath, walking my own steps, instead of chasing someone else's footprints. And strangely, that freedom didn't come from gaining more, but from daring to let go. I began to understand what it meant to live without needing to be just right. I didn't have to check off goals to feel worthy. I stopped obsessing over success as defined by others. I didn't need to be special. I just needed to be real. Even on the days I was just lying there doing nothing, I felt peace in my heart because I knew I was present, not pretending, not running away. The more honest I became with myself, the more I noticed something interesting. The outside world started to shift too. Not because the world actually changed, but because the way I looked at it did. The things that used to make me deeply anxious now passed by like a soft breeze. The people who once made me feel insecure no longer held power over me because I no longer needed them to define my worth. I started to see beauty in the simplest things: a soft, sunny afternoon, a warm bowl of rice, an old song playing out of nowhere. I stopped waiting for life to be stable or for me to be enough before allowing myself to feel joy. I was happy right inside my own imperfection, inside the cracks, inside a story still being written. This doesn't mean everything became perfect. I still have tired days, still feel confused at times, still catch myself in moments of self-doubt. But the difference is, I no longer judge myself for it. I no longer think something is wrong with me just because I don't know what to do next. I see it now as a natural part of living a rhythm, like the tide rising and falling, not meant to be controlled, only to be accepted. I also learned how to love myself, not with affirmations or self-help books, but by truly being there for myself during hard moments, by not abandoning myself when no one else understood, by listening to my feelings without rushing to label them. And I realized loving yourself isn't some grand gesture. It's a series of small choices each day, choosing honesty over pretending, rest over exhaustion, saying no instead of forcing a fake yes. Now, when I look back at my journey of seeing the truth, I'm no longer afraid of what happened. I know it was all necessary. Every shock, every tear, every fall was a gentle hand pulling me out of an old shell, so I could come home not as a more perfect version, but as a more truthful one. And I understand now, the truth didn't break me. It woke me up, not to change everything around me, but to change how I show up in this life, with sincerity, with humility, and with unconditional love for myself, both in my strength and in my softness. When I look back on this entire journey, from the very first moment I started feeling different to the collapse of each protective layer, each belief that was challenged, each pain that began to surface, I suddenly understood all of it was leading me to one single thing: the truth. Not some external truth, not a grand absolute truth that everyone must follow, but the truth within me, the truth of who I truly am, of what genuinely makes my heart come alive, of the values that are deeply mine and that no one else can define for me. Seeing the truth wasn't a glorious moment like I had imagined. It didn't come with blinding light or applause. It happened quietly, sometimes in the middle of a sleepless night, sometimes in a silent moment watching the rain fall. It wasn't loud, but it was deep enough that I could no longer go back to who I used to be. The truth doesn't answer every question, but it made me stop needing to ask so many. Because when I live in alignment with myself, everything else naturally becomes clearer. Now, I'm no longer searching for a place to belong. I understand that my own authentic presence is already a home. I no longer try to figure it all out or control life. I let it lead me one step at a time, with the trust that no matter where I end up, as long as I live truthfully, I'll never be lost. I want you to know, if you're starting to see the truth in your life, whether it scares you, hurts you, or confuses you, please know you're not alone. Everyone who has awakened has walked through that same darkness. And it's from within that very darkness that we realize the light isn't at the end of the road. It's inside us. So if today you feel yourself changing, if you're starting to question the things that once felt certain, if you sense a quiet longing to live more honestly, trust it. Take the step, even if it's small, because the moment you dare to see the truth is the moment you begin to truly live. And living as your real self with full sincerity, that is the most beautiful gift you could ever offer this life.